World vs. World is the pinnacle of build diversity in Guild Wars 2 because there are so many different roles and playstyles you can adopt that help your team in some way. However, the most effective way to win fights is to stack 5 Minstrel Tempests tighter than your boys on a cold day. There's not many other ways to answer that than to just deal overwhelming damage with PvE builds, or just split up and go elsewhere. When you realize that these Minstrel blobs are really good at maintaining their KDA because they never die, but also take forever to get anything done on the map because they scale up every objective while being slow and not having much ability to split up. So while Minstrels is actually the best way to win fights, this is balanced by the fact that rotation and pressuring multiple objectives on the map often results in higher war score. However, winning in World vs. World is not relevant, and so people find their own fun. For a lot of people, they enjoy stacking up and watching a DPS meter rise as they just chat with their guildies on Discord. For others who enjoy the intricacies of Guild Wars 2 combat, they may try out different builds and learn new playstyles. And for those who are afraid to find out whether dying in game means dying in real life, they'll run the tankiest build possible with 60% of their group consisting of healers that are also tanks. I personally think that it would be more fun if the squad meta revolved around dedicated healers that can be focused, tanks that can survive by themselves but can't support their allies as much, and DPS, as usual, that can pump out damage. With clearly defined backlines and frontlines, you can actually attempt to fight a larger size squad, but since healers are tanks with the Minstrel stats, they can just stack aggressively on top of their DPS and soak damage that doesn't go beyond the target cap of 5 players, meaning that most of the damage isn't hitting the DPS even when aimed at them. It's hitting the healers, who are constantly spamming out heals anyways and are also tanks. But I cannot change the balance of the game, I can only adapt to it. And the best way to adapt is either run the same thing, which I'd rather go play something else than sit here and watch 2 wet noodles slap each other, or adapt by using versatile builds that can split up when your team doesn't have enough damage, but can still provide plenty of team value and pressure when you can group up. And these types of builds are not only versatile for different types of content, but they are also pretty convenient. I've been asked by many people what builds can work for roaming and zerging, and while some roaming builds can work decently in a zerg, they won't be optimal. Of course, if you're running with your guild, then use what they want you to play. But if you're a solo player that has to fend for yourself until you can find others to play with, the value of versatility cannot be understated. So in this video, I'm going to go over 9 different builds, one for each class, that are already great roaming builds, but scale up very well in larger fights. Because these builds can be updated much more easily on their web pages, be sure to check the exact builds linked in the description on guildgen.com. And from now on, the roaming builds will be labeled with a preferred group size to help you understand which situations the build work in, and you can more easily find the build that fits your playstyle. For example, the Condi Druid build is one of the best 1v1 roaming builds, and it has some great CC with Immobilize for team play, but as soon as you get into larger scale fights, your conditions don't have time to tick and your projectiles get reflected, so at most 10v10 is where the Condi Druid works. Then there's the Fresh Air Weaver build, which has great burst damage for single targets, but the burst lacks when going against groups that can just revive targets that you burst since you run out of damage to follow through after your burst. Fresh Air Weavers are also easy targets to focus, so anything more than 5 players, it's just better to play Fresh Air Catalyst, which can provide boons to its team and more sustained damage. One last example, the Dagger Pistol Daredevil is usually seen as a small scale build, but it actually has great potential in medium-sized fights because it can support its allies by giving them stealth, rip stability off the key focus targets so their team can secure kills, and it can provide decent utility by stomping enemies with Shadow Step or Stealth. So up to 10v10, this would work pretty well. However, the Sword Dagger Daredevil, which is also a similar playstyle, which I think is better right now in World vs. World, however, is not as versatile, because it doesn't give much to its team other than Boon Rip. It's a bit more selfish, and while still decent in medium-sized fights, its damage is not as front-loaded, meaning that coordinated bursts with allies isn't as effective. so I would say that it caps out in usefulness at around 5 players. Most roaming builds work solo, but more supportive medic builds don't really work solo, so they have less versatility in their lack of self-sufficiency. But that's not to say that a build that has a low versatility is bad, it just means that you need to play to the niche of that build, which means picking your fights, sticking with your team, or rotating to other objectives. So let's get to the main purpose of this video, which is to detail the most versatile build for World vs. World, or one build for every squad size, for every class. If you enjoy this content, or it was helpful to you in any way, please subscribe, like the video, and to support me, join as a channel member. Now let's start with the warrior, which I've chosen as the Celestial Berserker Hambo, because that's already a decent build for 1v1s since it's tanky with great cleansing and stability, has a good balance of condition damage from the bow and CC burst from the hammer, but even further than that, it can perform blast finishers in its fire field to give might to allies, has immobilize for picking off targets with its team, and even the hammer primal burst is a daze and immobilize, which is great for engaging in large fights even when enemies have stability. The bow primal burst is also no longer a projectile, which helps to get around the projectile reflex frequently used in larger fights. So for me, this is one of the most versatile builds, not just for warriors, but of any build, simply because it can be a frontliner to take the pressure off of allies, it can support allies with Shake It Off cleanses and might application, and secure kills with CC. But while the next build is not as versatile, it is more powerful. The Revenant's Power Herald build isn't the best for solo roaming because it can be susceptible to CC and conditions, so generally people play the Vindicator for small scale since it's so much more survivability. But the Vindicator doesn't give much to its team and needs to dodge on top of enemies to get the full value from its dodge, meaning it needs to be in melee, which doesn't always work. So the Power Herald actually scales up better since it can give boons to allies, it has the option to use a hammer instead of the staff for a ranged damage option when you can't go in melee, and you don't need to change anything else in the build to do that, and the Facet of Light heal skill actually makes it more survivable in Zerg fights than a Vindicator, because it makes you immune to all damage for 3 seconds. So if you prepare your Facet of Light and you get caught, you, instead of dying instantly, get healed to full. But this next build also keeps your team from instantly dying, because the Guardian's Dragon Hunter specialization has one of the most powerful cooldowns with their Shield of Courage that blocks attack for allies in front of you for a few seconds. On top of this, the Spear of Justice has great team potential because you can pull enemies out of position so your team can get easy kills on them. One of the most devastating things for me when fighting outnumbered is when the enemy has a Dragon Hunter, because I just cannot escape if they land the tether. So just with the base virtues, the Dragon Hunter performs well, but there are also many different weapon options you can take, like the Sword, Shield, and Longbow set for more combo-oriented CC with your Test of Faith, or if you want to scale it up even more, you can go with the Hammer or Greatsword, so you can do maximum damage while your traps are out. However, Dragon Hunters are not as mobile as Willbenders, so they'll want to be aware to not take outnumbered fights too deep in enemy territory. Try to fight in choke points where you can lure enemies into your traps, not out in the open where they can be easily avoided. The next build is the Thief Spectre. While the Condition Spectre is better in smaller fights, the Power Spectre build has more mobility and versatility to handle all different kinds of situations. Using the pistol offhand, you can blast the smoke field with your shroud skills to give allies stealth, but the sword dagger set is best for poking enemies and combining with your wells to engage on enemies. There's tons of CC, boon rip to the target, and you even give stability to your allies. The only issue is that you're easier to focus as a Spectre than a Daredevil, and susceptible to power burst damage, but being aware and disengaging with your sword to return when enemies are trying to focus you is your best defense. I've also been using Spear on this build instead of Dagger Pistol to make it a bit better for skirmishing and self-sustain, so you can decide whether you want Dagger Pistol for stealth or Spear for a bit more versatility. But while having many options and mobility gives you versatility, sometimes just sheer damage from long range allows you to rip through anything from a safe distance, so you don't need to think about all the complexities of combat. It's no surprise why the Ranger's Sikkim Soul Beast is the most popular build in World vs. World. It's fun and powerful in small scale, and still super rewarding to play in larger fights where you can pick off enemies who walk out of position. Although it can be weaker when enemies use reflects, the Barrage, which is the Longbow 5, has 2 ammo now, which gives you plenty of AoE potential against larger groups, and if you really need to burst targets through reflects or blocks, you can take the Signet that gives you unblockable attacks for your rapid fire. Engineers are the most versatile class, so there's plenty of options here, but the most versatile engineer build is the Mortar Scrapper. It gives super speed to allies, which helps to get superior positioning. It has the function gyro for reviving allies, and it can use bulwark gyro for protecting their allies. When waiting for cooldowns, it can also just spam the mortar auto attack for infinite range damage, and with the high quickness uptime with a little bit of boon duration, this can keep up constant pressure in between its big hammer and gyro burst combos. This build also uses alchemy and tools, which makes it very survivable against conditions, which is the main counter to scrappers, so it isn't bad when outnumbered either, and depending on the situation, you can swap a couple traits to either go for more damage when you have support, or for more sustain when alone or outnumbered. Everyone knows that the Necromancer's Harbinger is the king of 1v1s because of its high sustain, and although the Harbinger provides allies quickness, and the Reaper only provides itself quickness, Reaper still scales up better in larger fights because it can't be easily focused like the Harbinger, which has no extra life bar and a lowered health pool. Even the tankiest Harbinger builds can easily die when outnumbered, but Reapers can tank a bit more until allies can reinforce them and have more reliable access to stability to prevent them from being locked down. So is Condition Reaper or Power Reaper more versatile? I'd say both are pretty good. Both have great damage, but the Condition Reaper obviously will be better in smaller fights with less support and cleansing, while the Power Reaper will be better in larger fights where it can coordinate Spinal Shiver's bursts. Condition Reaper has more chill, which is devastating and helps lock down enemies, but Power Reaper can get more value from the more mobile weapons like Spear or Sword, so it's really up to you, but I personally prefer the Power Reaper. Next is one of my favorite builds, the Mesmer's Greatsword Mirage. Since the Greatsword Ambush skill sends out multiple beams that pierce everything in their path, this build is great at damaging clumped up enemies from range, especially since it isn't a projectile that can be reflected. In larger fights, it doesn't get more complicated than this, but in smaller fights, there's quite a bit more finesse to landing your Sword 3 Immobilize into Greatsword 2 and Shatter Burst. There's boon removal on the Domination variant, but Aegis for allies on the Inspiration variant. If things go poorly, you can use the Sword Ambushes for mobility to disengage. Other than just pure damage though, there isn't much team support on the Greatsword Mirage, so if you want a similar build with tons of range damage that isn't projectile based, but with a bit more team synergy, there's the Spear Tempest for Elementalists. There's the Etchings, which are the 5 skills on each of the Spear attunements, which give massive powerful attacks to hit further away. But there's also the Overloads, which allow you to fight nearby enemies. You can give healing to allies with the Water Overload, reflect projectiles with Aftershock, and even replace one of your utilities for the Glyph Res or your Elite for Rebound. Since this build can be easy to focus when alone, when you want to fight in smaller scale fights, you can just swap weapon to a Dagger and Warhorn set, which is a little bit better in smaller scale fights, and you don't really need to change anything for that because Ellies can weapon swap out of combat. If you want to learn more about how to play these builds, then check the links to the build guides in the description. But as for this video, that's about it. So thank you guys for watching, subscribe, like the video, and I will see you all next time.